And the event has started. Morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mena Rawlings. I'm the new British ambassador here in Paris. Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue à notre événement aujourd'hui qui s'appelle France Industry Day. Et je pense que je vais parler en anglais ce matin, and I hope that works for everybody out there. So I may have met some of you before, but not all, obviously. And as I said, I'm the first female ambassador, to France. After 36 or so men, I've been in the job for about 2.5 months, and it's been busy. And there's a beautiful French expression which sums things up nicely for me, which is les événements s'enchaînent sur les chapeaux de roue, which for the English audience basically means lots of stuff's happened all at once. I'm really optimistic and passionate about the future of UK-France relations, but I don't think it's a secret that it's been a slightly bumpy time since before I arrived, and that has continued to a large extent since I got here. But what I'm really keen that we keep doing is just creating space to keep thinking about the longer term and the challenges we've got coming up, but also the opportunities. I'm keen to keep creating the space to think about the longer term future of the relationship. I'm keen that this residence that I'm sitting in at the moment becomes once again a real sort of hub of activity and of debate, which supports our aspirations for the relationship we want to see between France and the UK in the future. So I'm sorry that today this is online. I'm sure everyone's sick of sitting in their bedrooms or whatever with their slippers on, listening to people like me on Zoom. But I'm really grateful for the team who've put this together, and I hope that we can do this again in person next time. I'm really keen to get out there and to connect with different communities, with business around France, and I see that as a key part of my role. So in terms of today's event, I'm sure you're all aware of its purpose, which is basically to make sure there's a good level of understanding of the processes for the movement of goods between Britain and the EU, particularly given new UK procedures that will be introduced from January the 1st, 2022 through to July the 1st, 2022. And as you know, there's already been a lot of changes in the way goods are moved between the UK and France. And this is really important given the volume of trade between our two countries. And I've been looking at some statistics which interestingly show that certainly UK exports into France and into the EU in many cases have actually held up pretty well. And there's been quite a strong regrowth after obviously some very difficult months at the start of this year, after the border disruptions due to COVID and also Britain's formal exit from the European Union. But the bounce back has actually been pretty strong and healthy, and again gives me sort of grounds for optimism about the resilience of trade across La Manche. But clearly we are very alert to some of the challenges that you will face and want to support you in that. As you know, while European customs procedures and requirements came into effect at the beginning of 2021, the UK government took the decision to postpone the introduction of full border controls in recognition of some of the challenges that we know you face, and wanted to give more time to make sure that the changes were understood and that you had adequate time to prepare. So the team will talk through this as the day goes on, but the key point for me is that, as I've said already, UK import controls will be phased in throughout 2022, starting in January. So in today's webinar, you're going to hear from the experts who'll be able to talk you through the preparations required so that you can continue trading across the channel. And I'd really encourage everyone to use this as an opportunity to hear from key people in the Border and Protocol Delivery Group, HM Revenue and Customs. We've got people from DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and of course from BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, to ask any any burning questions. This event is one of many we'll be organising, so do sign up. For others, you can always watch this again if you like. If it wasn't, so fascinating the first time, you needed to see it all again a second time, it will be posted online on the gov.uk page, and you might want to share it with your teams, for example, to share the learning that you get from this event. And of course, my amazing team here at the British Embassy in Paris and in the France network are here at your disposal for anything you may need beyond today's session. So that's all I really wanted to say. Bienvenue. As I said at the start, I hope you get a lot out of this session. I know everybody taking part is really keen to have a proper debate and good conversation with you all. I'm going to hand back over to Natasha Draycott and the Border and Protocol Delivery Group. Bonne journée et à bientôt, j'espère. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mena, and welcome again to this Border and Protocol Delivery Group Industry Day session. So my name is Natasha Draycott, and I work for the Border Industry Engagement and Business Readiness team here at BPDG. So I appreciate that you'll all be keen to get to the detail of today's session and to hear from our departments, but I'll just run through a few sort of short slides before I pass on to my colleagues. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this just sets out some what we've called ground rules for today's events. So basically, please use the Q&A bar to ask your questions. We've got lots of colleagues available today to answer these, and we'll be sort of answering these as the event goes on, and then we'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the event. So please use that Q&A bar all the way through today. Also, just to say that after the event, we'll be sending the slides round to all registered participants. So I appreciate there's quite a lot of detail to go through today, but we'll be sending the slides out shortly so that you can go over that detail in your own time. We will also be uploading the recording of today's event to gov.uk. So again, you can go back and watch for further detail. And also sort of in the next week or 2 weeks, we will be sharing the Q&A document. So all the questions that you asked today, we will aim to get written responses from departments and send those to you. So on the next slide, we have today's agenda, which is displayed in UK time. So we'll be having presentations from UK departments, as Mena said. We have HM Revenue and Customs, we have the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and we have the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So once we've heard from those departments, we will run you through a few case studies which show the end-to-end movement of moving goods from France into GB, and then that will be followed by the Q&A session. So just before we move into the department's presentations, on the next slide, we do have a few short Slido questions that we would like you to fill in today, please. So if you use the QR code on screen or go to Slido and use the hashtag BPDG, then you will be able to access our poll. I'm also just going to post the link into the chat so that you can all see it. So if we go to the next slide, the first question on Slido is, have you moved goods between the EU and GB and vice versa since the 1st of January 2021? And there are some different options there for you to choose. So whilst you're answering that, the next slide is a summary slide which shows you the key dates for UK import controls over 2022. So I won't sort of dwell on this slide because our presenters will be talking it through in more detail, but it's quite a useful summary to have in the pack for you. So just before I hand over to my colleagues, there is another question on Slido. So on the next slide, so this is question 2. And this really is just to test what your knowledge is at this stage, and hopefully today's session will help to increase that knowledge. So thank you very much. I will now hand over to my colleague Nahid Williamson from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha, and good morning, everybody. As Natasha says, my name is Nahid Williamson, and I work in Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and I will be talking to you about customs processes. Can we have the first slide, please? So just to give you a brief overview of customs, and a quick overview in terms of the different customs requirements that are in place for the current year and the changes that will apply from next year, that is January 2022. So some dates here. Under the current arrangements throughout 2021, you can make a delayed declaration if you are importing non-controlled goods from the EU and are not making a full customs declaration. The delayed declaration will help importers if they are unable to make a full customs declaration or have not been authorised to use the simplified customs processes. If you are using delayed declarations, you will need to make a declaration in your commercial records at the time of import, known as the Entry into Declarant's Record, EIDR, followed by a supplementary declaration, which must be made within 175 days after the import. From 1st of January 2022, this option will no longer be available, and importers or their agents will need to be approved at the time of import to use simplified procedures, or again, they can make a full customs declaration. From 1st of October, the exit summary declarations have been required on all exports from GB to the EU. This means the waiver on empty pallets and containers moving under a transport contract stopped on the 30th of September 2021. You'll see on the slide another key change in 2022 on imports. That's specifically the entry summary declaration known as the ENS. This will be required from the 1st of July 2022. So these are some dates and a brief overview on what's happening this year and the changes that will come in next year. So I'll take the next slide, please. So on the safety and security ENS, just to explain again, that currently there is a 12-month waiver on the ENS requirements for goods being imported from EU into GB. That waiver will end in July 2022, and full entry summary declarations will be required. This is an important change because it is a legal requirement, and the ENS will need to be complete and accurate when it is entered into the safety and security GB system, and that's in advance of the goods arriving in GB. Also worth mentioning that because we recognise that things can change and information can change at a late stage, such as weather or traffic, etc., the ENS can be amended after the initial submission, and that can happen up until the point when the goods enter into the GB customs territory. In terms of the legal responsibility in making the safety and security declaration, that rests with the carrier. But if a third party lodges a declaration, this must be done with the carrier's knowledge and consent. I'll have the next slide, please. So making an ENS declaration. Okay, so to make it a safety and security declaration, you will need a GB URI number. The URI is the Economic Operator Registration and Identification Number. That will be required. The ENS basically holds key information and provides details about the consignor or the consignee, and it gives a description of the goods and the routing at the time of arrival. And to be able to submit an ENS, you will need to register and have access to the Safety and Security GB service in order to do that. And once you are registered on the Safety and Security GB service, you can submit an entry summary declaration by either purchasing a compatible software or employing the systems or service of a community system provider, the CSP. That briefly explains how to make the ENS declaration. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So on the Safety and Security EXS, for the exit summary declaration, now the exit summary declaration has been in place since 1st of January 2021, but the waiver for empty pallets, containers and vehicles being moved under a transport contract and all roll movement of goods, that came to an end on the 30th of September. The main important point to note here is that in most cases, the safety and security requirements for exports are met using the customs export declaration. But if there is no export declaration made, then from the 1st of October, an entry summary declaration is required. That basically just sort of tells you a little bit on the requirements for the EXS. Can we take the move to the next slide, please? So just a recap on the models for controlling goods, model for the customs controls. The main changes on the customs control model from 1st of January 2022 will mean that there will be two main standard customs models to control goods imported into GB in order to facilitate the smooth flow of goods and reduce any risk of congestion. Border locations receiving goods into GB from the EU will be able to either operate the existing temporary storage model or a new pre-lodgement model. The temporary storage model basically allows goods to be stored for up to 90 days in an approved temporary storage facility before a declaration is made, and allowing any checks to be conducted before goods are released from that facility. But the pre-lodgement model is for locations where space and infrastructure basically make it unsuitable to operate a temporary storage. So that's the difference. And under the pre-lodgement model, all goods will need to have the appropriate declaration before they board, and during the crossing there will be a communication with the person in control of the goods. That could be, for example, the driver of a lorry for accompanied goods, and they will receive the notification on whether goods are cleared to proceed or require any checks during this will happen during the crossing. The ports that operate the pre-lodgement model will need to make sure that goods are not arrived at that location without the pre-lodged declarations, and that they take reasonable steps to ensure that goods identified for any checks are then controlled upon arrival. I'll take the next slide, please. So just to go back to the temporary storage, under the temporary storage model, imported goods from the EU can be stored, as I said, for up to 90 days before being released into free circulation or exported or placed under an inward-outward special procedure, etc. But from January, 1st of January, an inventory system will be required for all temporary storage facilities. This will include storage of non-EU goods also. Those ports used in the temporary storage model can use GVMS to facilitate the control of pre-lodged declarations for accompanied RoRo goods and be able to complete the Office of Transit function. So that's what temporary storage allows. I'll take the next slide, please. So just to give you some information on the pre-lodgement and GVMS. So just speaking on GVMS at the moment, it's the new IT system, and it's the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, and it's been introduced to operate and support locations where pre-lodgement is required from January 2022. The GVMS has been operational for goods moving under transit into GB since January 21, but it will now be used for all routes from January 2022, and it will control the RoRo accompanied movements at temporary storage locations and also in the Office of Transit function to mark the entry of goods coming into the UK customs territory. The GVMS will also enable the declaration references to be linked together so that the driver or haulier, for example, only needs to present one single reference, and that reference is the goods movement reference called the GMR at the frontier to prove that all the necessary declarations have been pre-lodged for the goods on the vehicle. As I said earlier, the GVMS will enable HMRC to send notifications of any risks, whether the goods are cleared or not cleared, into HMRC systems to the person in control of the goods by the time they physically arrive in the UK, so that the driver knows where they need to go next, if any checks are required. I'll take the next slide, please. So using GVMS for transit purposes. This slide basically sets out the use of GVMS in relation to the transit movements. This means that imports for imports from 1st of January, the transit MRN movement reference number will be a key requirement for the GMR entry. And for exports, that is GB to the EU, although the export declarations are required from January 2021, you will not be able to pre-lodge these using the GVMS until next year from 1st of January 2022. So that's the use of GVMS for the purpose of transit movements. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of using GVMS, so to use GVMS, both UK and EU hauliers will need to take specific steps to register for GVMS and be able to create a GMR. This will require having a government gateway account. You can have that could be your existing account, or you'll need to create a new account. But as long as the account used, it's the same account used to create the GB URI. Now, you will need a GB URI, which is again the economic operator registration and identification number to have access to GVMS. For moving goods between EU to GB, traders will need access to CHIEF, the NCTS, and GB Safety and Security Service through the CSPs. And similarly, hauliers and carriers will also need to have access to systems, to GVMS and GB Safety and Security, as it's set out in the slide there. Okay, I'll take the next slide, please. Okay, the GVMS import process. So this slide illustrates the import process and what you need to do before moving goods. It's quite a detailed slide, and I appreciate that you might not be able to read it very well, but basically, just to summarize, it outlines the steps which explains what happens prior to moving goods. which captures information on applying for a GB URI number, registering for GVMS, submitting or a full or simplified customs or a trans declaration or EIDR, and the completing the safety and security declaration, etc. So that's the information set out on what happened before. The process also explains the different steps before arriving at the EU place of exit, which requires hauliers to request goods movement reference from GVMS for all movement types, and goods to be loaded to the vehicle and trailer, and GVMS that will then obviously validate the traders. URI is linked to the authorization, so that's a whole process that happens before arriving at the EU place of exit, and you've got all the detail there. The slide also sets out the actions taken on arriving at the EU place of exit, which involve the carrier to capture the GMR at check-in and for GVMS to validate that. So that's all set out in the detail, and the slides will be shared with you, so you'll get a chance to read that. Okay, I'll take the next slide, please. Just to touch very briefly on the Common Transit Convention. In brief, the CTC allows goods to move under duty suspension between member states and those countries that are part of the convention. The UK acceded to the convention and is an independent member of the CTC. The CTC provisions mean that there are no customs checks or payment of duties until goods have arrived at their destination. There are three distinct functions that fulfill the CTC requirements. These are the Office of Departure, the Office of Transit, and Office of Destination. For the Office of Departure and Destination, these actions must be completed at either a customs office or at the approved premises of the authorised consignor, or if it's a case of consignee. The Office of Transit is performed once the goods enter a new customs territory. I'll be covering the three distinct functions in the coming slides to highlight some of the common mistakes that occur and how you can avoid these mistakes. So I'll take that next slide, please. Okay, so on transit, avoiding common errors, and in this case, where hauliers are not ending movements at the Office of Destination or are not completing an Office of Transit on entry into GB. So the main important point to draw out in this slide is the common mistake that occurs when transit movements are not correctly discharged at the Office of Destination or by the authorised consignee. So basically, when your goods arrive at the destination country, it's important that the transit accompanying document, the TAD, is presented to customs at the Office of Destination. This has to be a customs office or at the premises of an authorised consignee, whether that's your own or your agent's premises, so they can inform the NCTS that the goods have arrived. Even if your goods have been presented to an Office of Transit at the border in the country of destination, the haulier must still attend an Office of Destination or premises of an authorised consignee to end the transit movement, which allows the guarantee to be released. The guarantee is key here because it will not be released until the transit movement has been ended. And if you do not discharge your transit movement and the guarantee is not released, it could mean that traders will reach or exceed their limit on guarantees. And if that happens, then new transit movements cannot start, and that could cause disruption and impact your supply chain. So these are the things to remember here on this slide. I'll take the next slide, please. So some more common errors in transit, particularly being closed off before goods leave the EU, and some inconsistencies between goods. and transit declarations and the import documents. So again, more common errors on closing transit movement. This is again another important step. And if the movement is closed on NCTS before the goods have left the EU, now this will be regarded as being legally non-compliant, where a consignee closes off a transit movement before goods have been received in that case. And in these circumstances, as the goods are no longer under a valid transit movement, they will be stopped at the border and be held for checks and could face penalties. There are examples of paperwork errors. So again, it is important to highlight that if the papers are not in order or the correct information is missing, that information could be around weight, the volume or description of goods, then the movement cannot be discharged on arrival. And again, the guarantee cannot be released. That just captures some common errors there. I'll take the next slide, please. So again, just finally want to end by covering the office of departure and declaring the office of departure. Another the important message to make clear is to get the office of departure right. A transit movement can only be started at the office of departure on the transit declaration, which cannot be diverted or come from a different location. It must be the location where goods are presented to Border Force by the haulier to begin the transit movement. So on the Office of Transit, this means making sure that the Office of Transit you are travelling through is included in the transit declaration. And the Office of Transit is the port of entry into the new or next customs area. It's not the port of exit that you are leaving behind. So to make this process simple and easy, the transit declaration must include each Office of Transit you will report to on your journey. This will help the movement to be processed quickly as possible at each location. If you are bringing goods into the UK on behalf of someone else, make sure that they are aware of the route you plan to take in advance, so that they can declare the correct office or offices of transit as well. So that basically covers a sort of summary on transit and some of the errors, common errors that occur. I'll move on to the next slide, please, now. Just a brief one on GB import VAT. Okay, as the slide states here, the postponed VAT accounting is available to VAT registered businesses for import from anywhere in the world, including EU, up to 31st December 2021. And there are certain circumstances where importers must use the PVA. But after that date, the use of PVA will be optional in nearly all cases. For the delayed declaration or the simplified procedures and entry into declarant's records, importers must use the PVA. The PVA is available, but optional to traders who do not use the delayed declaration. For non-VAT registered traders, they will be able to pay the VAT at the point of declaration. This also includes the supplementary declaration. And for the non-established taxable persons, they're also entitled to use PVA, but must hold a UK URI and instruct an agent to make the declaration on their behalf. That sort of speaks for itself, the information on the import VAT. I'll move to the next slide, please. The empty and returnable packaging. Okay, just to explain here that since January 2021, an import or export declaration has been required on reusable packaging and for the returned goods relief or temporary admission. The declaration can be made either orally or by conduct. But to qualify for a relief from import duty, the reusable packaging must have been in UK free circulation from 1st of January 2021. For reusable packaging from the EU, it must have been transported to the EU before the end of the transition period and then returned before the 31st of December 2021. Now, although the importer and exporter do not need to own the packaging or the goods in them, but if they are to claim the returned goods relief, then the importer and exporter need to be the same person. And there's a link there for you for further information on that. I'll move across to the next slide, please. So very briefly on the rules of origin, under the UK and EU Trade Cooperation Agreement, which is a TCA, to claim preference, traders need to first classify their goods and check that the goods meet the rules. In order to make a claim, the importer can use a statement of origin made by the exporter that the product is originating, or they can use the importer's knowledge that the product is originating. So there are two different ways of making that statement. The REX number in the EU is the exporter's reference number, which is required with consignment as a total value of €6,000. For the UK, the exporter reference number will be the economic operator registration and identification number, the EORI. That will be applicable for the UK. I'll take the next slide, please. Preparing for January 2022. So this final slide basically summarizes the important changes you need to make to be prepared for January 2022. It is important that you take steps to ensure that your supply chain is ready and that you understand how you intend to operate from January 2022. And there's some key headings there. The first important step is agreeing the Inco terms, and you must do this in advance to ensure that there is a clear understanding on who is taking the responsibility for all the different transactions, so that you have a smooth process in place. To be prepared, it also means applying for any authorizations and access to government systems such as Gvms and the simplified procedures. You can also see a summary of key dates, which I've covered. With January, where full import declaration will be required unless you're authorized to use the simplified procedures, and the key date for July next year on safety and security declarations on import, which will be required. That brings me to the end of the customs slides. I'll pass you back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're now going to hand over to the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So I think I will actually be passing to my colleague Nadia Manan, as Emily is having some technical issues. So Nadia, are you there and are you ready?
Morning, yes I am here.
Brilliant, thank you.
No worries, thank you Tasha. Yeah, as Tasha mentioned, I'll be doing the presentation today. My name is Nadia Manan and I work for the Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK, so thank you for joining me today. I'll be talking you through the new import controls for sanitary and phytosanitary goods entering Great Britain following the announcement that was made by UK government on 14th September. As Tasha said, these slides will be shared with you after today's event, and my colleagues are also joining for the Q&A, so please do share your questions in the chat or in the Q&A session. If you could move forward 2 slides, please. So some changes were introduced in January 2021 and already apply to certain goods, such as products of animal origin under safeguard measures, live animals, and high priority plants and plant products. There are links to further guidance on this page if you need a refresher on these controls. If you can move on to the next slide, please, and I can talk you through the changes to import controls. So I will now give you a brief overview of future import controls which will come into force next year, before talking in more detail about IT systems, health certification and marketing standards. From 1st January 2022, products of animal origin, animal byproducts, and high-risk food not of animal origin will need to be pre-notified. Pre-notification for all regulated plants and plant products will also be required. Notification should be made by your importer in Great Britain using the Import of Animal, Food and Feed System, also known as IPAFS, which is a new IT system for notifying the authorities in Great Britain of the arrival of sanitary and phytosanitary goods. From July 2022, there will be new requirements for export health certificates for products of animal origin and animal byproducts. The requirement for phytosanitary certificates will be extended to all regulated plants and plant products, and not just those which are high priority. They will also be subject to physical and identity checks at border control posts. Sanitary and phytosanitary goods will also need to enter Great Britain through an appropriate border control post to enable physical checks. However, physical checks of live animals will continue at places of destination until notified otherwise. So, if we move on to the next slide, what do you need to know for 1st January? All sanitary and phytosanitary goods will need to be pre-notified using the IT system IPAFS. It is the responsibility of your importer in Great Britain to submit a pre-notification on IPAFS. In order to submit a notification, they will need the following information: the product being imported, the date the product will be imported, which country the import product is coming from, and the place of destination for the consignment. To access IPAFS, the importer will need to create a government gateway ID via gov.uk. The first person to register an organisation will become the administrative owner. In order to raise a notification, you will need to have a UK-based entity that can be detailed on the application and is responsible for the consignment. You may need to employ an import agent to do so. Any notification raised on IPAFS must be raised by the person responsible for the load. So if we move on to the next slide, I can talk you through export health certificates that will be required from July. So it is the EU exporter's responsibility to obtain the export health certificate, which will be issued to you by the competent authority in the country from which you are exporting from. A certifying officer authorised by the competent authority must complete the official certificate. So this could be an official veterinarian or official inspector as defined by the relevant EU retained legislation. The EU exporter must send an electronic copy of the health certificate to their importer in Great Britain. The original must be presented with the goods to the border control post. Your importer in Great Britain must upload the electronic copy of the certificate to IPAFS as part of the pre-notification process. Any official sanitary and phytosanitary documents that are required to accompany the health certificate will be specified on the relevant health certificate. Other documentation may be required depending on the commodity, such as catch certificate for marine caught fish. Model health certificates are available on gov.uk, and you can use these to check the specific requirements for your commodity. I must stress that these are examples of the certificates. The real certificates will be issued by the relevant competent authority in your country. There are more details about how these certificates are filled in on the link at the bottom of this slide. If you cannot identify an appropriate health certificate, you must speak with your importer in Great Britain and check gov.uk for an import licence. If there is no import licence available, you will need to complete an IV58 form and send it to the Animal and Plant Health Agency, and links are available on this slide again. So on the next slide, I can talk you through the 1st July phytosanitary certificate. So from 1st of July 2022, phytosanitary certificates will be required for all regulated plants and plant products. A phytosanitary certificate is a statement from the Plant Health Authority the consignment has been officially inspected, that it complies with legal requirements for entry into Great Britain, and that it is free from quarantine pests and diseases. the phytosanitary certificate will need to be obtained from the Plant Health Authority in the country where the supplier is based. The inspection for the phytosanitary certificate must take place no more than 14 days before the consignment is dispatched, and someone in the inspecting Plant Health Authority must sign the phytosanitary certificate within the same 14-day period. You will need to upload a copy of the phytosanitary certificate on the import IT system Peach if you need to pre-notify your consignment. So on the next slide, I'll talk you through composite products, as we tend to get a lot of questions from businesses about these products. So to clarify what I mean by composite product, these are food products that are intended for human consumption only. They contain a mix of processed products for animal origin and plant products used as a main ingredient, not just added for flavouring or processing. To give you a few examples, this could include a ready meal lasagna, pork pies or mayonnaise if it contains more than 50% egg. Composite products must follow the stage requirements for products of animal origin, so they will require pre-notification from 1st January 2022, and from 1st July they will require health certification and to arrive at a border control post. However, there are a few exemptions. Goods are exempt if they contain less than 50% processed animal product, no meat product, and they meet the requirements set out in the legislation outlined in this slide. If your goods contain any meat product or more than 50% animal product, it must be pre-notified using IPAFs. It must be accompanied by an export health certificate and follow the phased approach set out for products of animal origin. If you are not sure if this applies to your product, there is detailed guidance, including a composite product decision tree available on the Animal Imports file sharing link, which you will find at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So from July 2022, the process for pre-notifying sanitary and phytosanitary goods on IPAFs will change. From July, a Common Health Entry Document, or CHED, will be required, which means that further information will need to be entered as part of the notification. The required information is laid out on this slide for you, but this includes information such as the country of import, the product, reason for import, and transportation details. If you go to the next slide, please. There is a process map on this slide for July 1st, and please do look at this for further detail once the slides are sent out. Next slide, please. So moving on, there are some changes being implemented for products transiting through Great Britain. From January 2022, animal products transiting through Great Britain will need to be pre-notified on IPAFs before entry. Before the goods leave the country, they will need to be notified to authorities. Plants and plant products will need to be accompanied with a signed declaration stating the goods are under phytosanitary transit. There is no requirement to pre-notify these goods. From July 2022, consignments transiting through Great Britain will require an export health certificate and must enter and exit through a point of entry with an appropriately designed border control post. If you can move on to the next slide, please, and I can talk you through groupage. And by this, I mean the commercial grouping of multiple consignments within a single sealed trailer or container. So there are 4 models that have been developed for importing groupage loads from the European Union into Great Britain. These include the consolidation hub method, whereby different consignments are brought together at a single approved premise. The certification takes place for all individual consignments by the certifying officer. Grouped consignments are loaded and sealed before they leave for onward destination. The sequential or single model, which facilitates pickup from multiple sites. Certification takes place at each site. A seal is applied to the overall load at each pickup point, removed and replaced at the next pickup. This method is relying upon a certificate of non-manipulation. And lastly, there is also the linear or multiple pallet model, which is designed to facilitate pickups from multiple sites with certification at each collection point in the chain. This requires pallet level sealing. Sealed pallets are added to the means of transport and the individual seal number on the pallet recorded on the export health certificate. There is no requirement for a certificate of non-manipulation with this model, but it does require the presence of a certifying officer at each collection point. All models may be used in conjunction with each other as long as general principles around sealing and certification remain. For example, traders may wish to blend the linear model with the consolidation hub method. The key with the mixed hybrid approach will be ensuring full traceability of all the products entering Great Britain. We'll be sending out links with further information once these have been updated to reflect recent changes. We can move on, please, and I'll now talk to you about marketing standards in more detail. Marketing standards will differ according to the product you are exporting, so please do visit the links provided for detailed guidance. From July 1st, 2022, all hops imports from third countries, so this is both EU and non-EU countries, will require a Great British attestation of equivalence issued by an authorised agency from the country of origin. Until 30th June 2022, all imported hops and hop products must be accompanied by one of the following documents: either an EU attestation of equivalence issued by an authorised agency, or an EU certificate from EU member states only issued by an approved certification centre. With regards to wine, the UK is taking steps to remove the requirement of VI1 certification for wine imports. We have started the legislative process for the removal of VI1 certificates. We are aiming to implement legislation to remove VI1s before the end of the year. However, our timeline for implementation is dependent on parliamentary consent and approval. And lastly, with regards to poultry meat, EU poultry meat with optional indications for farming or chilling methods or both will need a third country listing or an EU competent authority certificate. You can go to the next slide, please. The UK government established new UK geographical indicators or GI schemes on 31st December 2020. All UK products currently protected under the EU's GI schemes continue to be protected under the UK GI schemes. The UK government established new UK geographical indicator schemes on the 1st of January 2021, which means that all existing products registered under the EU's GI schemes before 1st January 2021 are now protected under the UK schemes. New GI logos are available for UK GI products. The logos will remain optional for producers outside of Great Britain. The new UK GI logos are available to download on gov.uk. As to the question of whether EU products will be protected in the UK, we of course intend to honour our legal obligations under the withdrawal agreement. Other frequently asked questions include whether you can use both the UK and the EU logo on your product. The answer is that GI products are protected under both the UK and EU schemes. Will be able to use both the UK and EU logos when the product is on sale in the UK. They will also be able to use both logos when the product is on sale in the EU, provided that this is not prohibited by EU regulations. So we can move to the next slide, please. And I can speak to you about olive oil. So olive oil is exempt from sanitary and phytosanitary import checks. Phytosanitary certificates are not required for plant products such as fruit and vegetables that have been processed and packaged to the point that they no longer pose a biosecurity risk. This means that processed products such as olive oil do not require a phytosanitary certificate and aren't subject to import checks as part of the new phased import controls for plants and plant products. With regards to the marketing standards, Existing EU regulations set out the labelling and packaging requirements, and these regulations have been retained. There are no requirements for any kind of conformity certificate for olive oil at import. From 1st October 2022, you cannot use the term non-EU for olive oil blends sold in Great Britain. If your extra virgin or virgin olive oil is a blend of oils from different countries, then you must include further information, including a list of countries the blend of oils is from. There's further information available on this slide. There'll be a 21-month transitional period for olive oil labelling, in which non-EU can be used for 21 months for olive oil blends sold in Great Britain. If we can move to the next slide, please. You may also need to be aware of upcoming controls for organic products and food labelling. From 1st July 2022, organic products imported from the EU to Great Britain will require a certificate of inspection. You will need to use the interim manual GB organic import system to do so. And the next slide, please. So lastly, in terms of food labelling, you have a little longer to make the necessary changes. For any pre-packed food placed onto the UK market after 31st September 2022, a UK-based food business operator or UK importer address on the food will be required. Labelling rules apply once the food is placed on the market rather than when it's imported. Therefore, food information may be corrected following import, but before the food is placed on the market in the UK. Overstickering is an acceptable method of correcting information, but an oversticker must not obscure or cover mandatory information, for example, the date mark or the lot mark. So that concludes my presentation today. On the next slide, there are links where you can access further information, and I'll now pass you back to Natasha for the rest of our presentations today.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand straight over to another BPDG colleague, John Winterburn, who's going to talk through Kent and the short straits. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. So as Natasha says, my name is John. I work within the contingency and location team within BPDG, and today I'm just going to go through some of the inland border facilities that in the UK, and specifically talk about a couple in the Kent area. So next slide, please. Thank you. So inland border facilities in Kent, at the moment there's Ebbsfleet, Sevington, Stop 24, Dover and Wester Docks, and there's one Dover IBF which is currently not in operation, but we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. And next slide, please. So there are other sites around the UK and land border facilities around the UK. So Warrington in North West, Holyhead in Wales, Birmingham in the Midlands, and North Weald as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So going to focus now on Sevington, which is one of the sites in Kent. So from January 2022, all short straits traffic that will be requiring checks are going to be directed to Sevington. After full inbound checks come into effect in July 2022, traffic will continue to go into Sevington. And as the Dover sites, which I'll talk about in a bit, go live, they'll become available as well. The sort of checks that are completed at Sevington will include CITES, ATA, TIR carnets, traffic management, Office of Destination and Office of Transit compliance checks, and border readiness checks. At Sevington, the stays are limited to 2 hours, and an IBF app is available for drivers who have smartphones to help them get processed on site at Sevington as quickly as possible. You can also use the service to tell HMRC in advance that you're attending an IBF, because the goods that you're moving are either going to the Office of Departure or Office of Destination, are covered by the ATA carnet, or need a CITES permit. Next slide, please. Thank you. The departments who are on site at Sevington will be HMRC and Border Force. They're currently on site. In the future, they'll be joined by colleagues from DEFRA, DVSA, and the Port Health Authority as well. At the moment, capacity at Sevington is just over 1,000 spaces. They include 550 holding spaces, 300 in the contingency freight management spaces, and 245 in the swim lanes. That capacity that's quoted may not be actual numbers when the site is fully operational, simply because of changing needs and requirements that are being held at the moment. There is a contingency in place for if Sevington isn't available for whatever reason or it's closed, and that would be to direct traffic to another available site, which would include Ebbsfleet, Warrington and Birmingham. Next slide, please. Thank you. So future Kent sites. So as I mentioned before, there are other Kent sites that are currently being built. So the Dover IBF, that's a further HMRC site being developed with the aim of coming online for the end of next year, 2022. That site will act as a location for inbound and outbound transit of goods to and from the UK, and providing a facility for custom checks to be undertaken as well, 365 days per year. There is an additional DEFRA site that's been developed for POAO checks. Further details on this aren't currently available as it's currently at a commercially sensitive stage. There is also an option of an additional DEFRA site for small animal checks. Again, that's in the early stages, and more information will be provided closer to completion. And that ends my little moment of speaking within the IBFs for Kent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now hand over to the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So I think my colleague Claire McKee is online to chat you through the UKCA marking.
Morning, Natasha, and morning, everyone. As Natasha said, my name is Claire McKee, and I'm calling in today from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I'm going to be talking a bit about the UKCA marking. And for those who are unaware, the UKCA marking is the new conformity assessment mark that is replacing the CE mark in the UK. Next slide, please. So this slide sets out the timeline for adopting the UKCA marking and some key dates to be aware of and some key milestones. So as of now, you are able to use the UKCA marking. It came into implementation at the start of this year. In some cases, so for some products, you will need to be using it right now. Until the 31st of December 2022, you can continue to use CA marking on goods. So that means you can essentially place CA marked goods on the market until this date, and whilst you use this time to build UKCA marking into your product lines. From the 1st of January 2023, you must use the UKCA marking for most manufactured goods placed on the GB market. And this doesn't apply to all goods. Medical devices have a slightly different timeline, and this very much depends on product-specific legislation. So you should double check that when deciding what time you need to use UKCA by. But for most goods, it is from the 1st of January 2023. Until 31st December 2023, you can continue to apply UKCA using a sticky label or putting it on accompanying documents. This is to allow a little bit more time to assist businesses and to kind of ease into the usage of UKCA. From the 1st of January 2024, that is the point from which UKCA marking must be on goods, and it must be directly on the product unless, of course, legislation states otherwise. Next slide, please. All other UKCA requirements are the same. So products that previously required CE marking and also aerosol products will still need to use UKCA to be sold in GB. Businesses will need to use a UK approved body if their product requires third-party testing by a conformity assessment body. And there is a database called UK MCAB, which is listed on gov.uk, and that contains all UK approved bodies that can issue the UKCA mark. The responsibility of the importer to apply their address to the product by 1st of January 2023 is still required. So ultimately, all responsibility lies with the importer to make sure that the address is on the product and on the goods. Requirements for placing products on the NI market are unchanged, so you continue to use CE marking or a combination of UK NI and CE. Next slide, please. So I'll touch briefly on end of easement for rules of origin. So until 31st of December 2021, businesses do not need suppliers' declarations from suppliers in place at the time the goods are exported, but they will be needed at the point of export from 1st of January 2022 onwards. You will only need suppliers' declarations for goods that influence the originating status of the final product. Imported goods that the product-specific rule allows you to use do not require a supplier's declaration. And finally, each consignment of goods can have a separate supplier's declaration or a long-term supplier declaration can be used. And guidance on rules of origin and supplier declarations can be found online on gov.uk, and these slides will be disseminated so you can access the link directly yourselves. So thanks for listening, everyone. I will pass back to Natasha to continue the rest of the session.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to another BPDG colleague, Scott Spencer, who's going to talk through the single trade window. Scott, are you there and able to unmute?
Hello, Natasha. Can you hear me?
We can, yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Sorry, I've had a few issues with logging in today. So my name is Scott Spencer. I'm head of the Programme Management Office in the Single Trade Window Programme in BPDG. Here to talk today about the Single Trade Window. And what I'm going to be talking about, just very briefly going through some slides quickly, is what is a single trade window and what is some of the key features of a single trade window. What is it about? What does it do? And give some more background and context to that. So that's really what I'm just going to be covering over the next 10 minutes or so. So if we can go to the first slide, please. I'll just let that come through. You'll see what is a single trade window. So I'll start talking while we're waiting for it to come up. And it's very much a single gateway for trade. Now, it's very interesting that the definition by the World Customs Organization is that it's a facility that allows parties involved in trade and transport to lodge standardized information and documents with a single entry point to fill all import, export and transit related regularity requirements. So what does that actually mean in practice? And let's expand this a bit in some of the bullets underneath. We're saying here a single trade window. It will radically then transform traders and government interact at the border. It will act as a single gateway for sharing information and completing import, export and transit requirements. Now that's the really important part here. The single trade window will enable the completion of import, export and transit requirements all in one place. So it's an integral part of the UK's 2025 border strategy, blue ribbon part of the strategy actually moving forward, how we trade around the border. And as you can see in the next bullet, it said at the moment traders have to submit similar information across multiple systems, across multiple organisations when carrying out a trade at the UK border. So, and obviously this takes time, effort, frustration, cost. So this is really what we're trying to do here is actually reduce all this so it's much easier to trade across the border. The third point here is we enable traders, agents, intermediaries just to submit information once only for a single digital entry point. So can do, as I said before, all those import, export and transit requirements. A single place for submitting information is the really important point here. And then the single trade window will take all that information, all that data, and exchange it with the departments it needs for border processes and provide a single consolidated response for the user. So the user's not getting multiple responses from different organisations, bodies across the border. It's just dealing once only through the single window. And as the single trade is developed, it will lead, this is a really important point, it will enable users to track consignments and their progress through the border journey, which is something not quite so easy at the moment, but you'll be able to track what's going on and where goods are in the transit process across the border. Can we move to the next slide, please, Natasha? you'll see this is a very simple diagram. And what is STW continued? So in this picture, this summarizes really what I said. You have the current model where traders have to deal with multiple departments, HMRC, Home Office, DEFRA, DIT, etc., going backwards and forwards with information. So the diagrams just come up. That's the left-hand side, the current model. That's where we are at this moment in time. Then when the single trade window is implemented, so we're looking to have that system up and running over the next few years. It'll be operational, fully operational by 2024. We tend to have, you'll see here on the right-hand side, where traders input into an STW system and then sends that information all between as a single point between all these various departments. So it's complete opposite of the left-hand part of the slide. Where multiple departments, it's one single point, one single data entry point. Next slide, that's okay. I'm just going to cover here some of the key features. So some of the key features, looking at this from a pre-border, border, and post-border, this slide just sets up what some of the key features of a single trade window system will have. You'll see there simple gateway to trading services, product licenses, certificates, memberships, online submission of supporting documents, pre-population of declarations, product licenses, single sign-on for traders, one single place to sign on, not multiple having to sign on to different departmental systems that operate around the border, and simple declarations, unified identity with embedded guidance. At the border itself, alerts, visibilities of goods progressing, and through the border compliance checks. I mentioned that a bit earlier, supply chain optimization, and then really post-border automated key trading activities. So that all takes place afterwards. But this is all really important point. It's all underpinned by data sharing across government departments, which doesn't happen at the moment, data-driven dashboards, open API to encourage industry innovation. So that's really, really important. That's going to be the approach to the development of the STW, provision of data to risk-in systems. So again, it's sharing that data information around much more widely than currently happens at the moment. So if we can just move this on to I've just got one or two slides left. STW objectives. So as we talked about a bit earlier, by removing duplication, increasing visibility of progress at the border, STW will transform the journey, significant efficiencies for users, improving data integrity and reliability, facilitate compliant trade, which is a prioritization of HMT to enabling improved risking at the same time. STWs are very common across features across the world, in various countries, US, Singapore, various countries have them already across the world. So it's something that we want to work with them on and enable the UK to be innovative, modern trader partner, as well as supporting the UK's ambition, as I mentioned in the strategy, to be the world's most effective border. And finally, on this slide, we will be developing the UK trade window over a number of years. Said that earlier. It will be an iterative approach. We'll come on various functions over the next few years, through to the next 5 years, before it becomes fully efficient. It's not just about the technology, but it's engaging with and supporting users through their border trade journey with brilliant guidance. So this is a really key component of the single trade window. It's making sure it has robust guidance to support traders as well. And this leads me on to my final slide. If we can move on, Natasha, to STW guidance service. And just a bit of a plug what we have in operation at the moment. Just hold on a sec. So we've already started work on a guidance to be part of the STW guidance service with our check how to import or export goods service on gov.uk. It's been tailored to be accessible and intuitive, based on industry needs, a lot of user research with industry in putting together the guidance service, and also caters by exporters by integrating with SHEG, which is check duties and customs procedures for exporting goods, which the Department of International Trade operates. So the two systems act hand in hand in parallel, and you can see there I've got the link to the guidance service, so if anyone wants to go have a look and log in, and then please do so. Be really grateful. So good if folks can have a look at that system. It'd be terrific to provide, and you've got there, if there's any opportunities to provide any feedback to us on that, would be very welcome as well. So I put on there a link to if you think about STW, the guidance service, or any questions you want to ask right at the bottom on inquiries, then please get in touch. An email address is at the bottom. So Natasha, that's my quick run through of single trade window. I hope that's really helpful and tell everyone the progress we've been making.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I know it's not easy when you're phoning into these types of things, but thank you. So I'm now going to move on to the case study section. So we've prepared sort of a series of case studies for the event today, and we have 9 in total to go through. So don't worry, I'm not going to go through all 9 of these in detail, but we will be sharing the slides today after the event. So the intention is that you can take these slides away and study the case study sort of at your own pace and look at the detail in there. So the purpose of bringing these together is to illustrate the end-to-end movement EU to GB and to show what each actor in the supply chain needs to do at various stages during the movement. So just to run you through sort of briefly the 9 case studies that we'll be looking at today. So the first one is exporting auto parts via the short straits to GB, and that will be broken down into January and July 2022. At this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Luke, who will go through a detailed Gvms example. We'll then move on to exporting auto parts unaccompanied, and that will be again split into January and July 2022. You can probably see a theme developing. We'll then look at SPS procedures, and we've got a case study on exporting cheese. So that will be again January and July. And then the final case study that we have to go through today is exporting wine from France to GB using transit. So that looks at the excise procedures as well as transit procedures. And again, I have split that into January and July. So as I say, I'm going to run through these really briefly so that you can work through them in your own time. And in each of the examples, we've identified the importer and the exporter and the haulier and what processes each of those need to do. But we do recognise that some people will choose to use an agent. So please note that these steps might be different if you're using an agent, but we did just want to clearly set out what the procedures were. So if we go to case study 1, please. So as you can see, this one is exporting auto parts from France to GB via the short straits in January 2022. So if you go to the next slide, this slide sets out all the different registrations that people will need in order to move their goods. So as you can see, the EU exporter has to apply for an EU EORI number. The GB importer needs a GB EORI number in order to interact with the GB customs systems. And then the haulage company requires both an EU EORI number and a GB EORI number so that they can interact with the borders and customs systems on both sides of the border. If you're moving goods through a port that operates the pre-lodgement model, then the haulage firm will need to register for Gvms, and there are further links and more information in the slides. So once we send the slides round, please do use those links where you can find more information. So on the next slide, so I appreciate there's a lot of information on these slides and they're potentially not the most clear, but they do set out sort of numbered step by step all the processes that you need to go through. So it sets up what each person in the supply chain needs to do and when. And in this case, the exporter is responsible for the export and the importer is responsible for the import. So I won't read through sort of each step for all of the case studies, but I will just take you through this one in a little bit more detail. So we start sort of at the top left of the slide, and Damien, the EU exporter, and Claire, the UK importer, first of all need to agree their Inco terms, so it's clear who is responsible for what. Damien will then submit the export declaration to the French customs system. So in this case, France is the country of export and the country of exit, and he needs to list the port of exit as well as part of that declaration. As he's submitting a combined export declaration, he doesn't need a separate exit summary declaration. So once he's submitted that declaration, the French customs system produces an export accompanying document, sometimes referred to as an EAD, and that allocates an MRN. So at the same time, Claire, the UK importer, pre-lodges her import declaration, and that needs to be done before the haulage firm moves the goods into GB. So she submits the UK import declaration using Chief, which produces an MRN as well. And MRN stands for Movement Reference Number, and that is given to the haulage firm. So then once the haulage firm receive the MRN, they use the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, Gvms, which Naheed spoke through earlier, to input the import documentation. They create the GMR and link the MRN for the GB import declaration and the intended vehicle and crossing detail. So this GMR contains the MRNs for all of the goods the driver's carrying, and the GMR is presented as part of the check-in at the border. So the haulage firm then provides Joe, who's the driver in this example, with the MRNs for the export declaration and the GMR for the import declaration. And this is what Joe presents at the border in France. So the MRN is scanned by the carrier, and then when the truck embarks on the shuttle or ferry, the export is discharged by the carrier's IT system, which communicates with the French customs system. So, as I said earlier, Joe also provides the import GMR, and the driver cannot board if the GMR is not valid. So now I'm moving over to the other side of the page, and we're on box 10. So once the export accompanying document is discharged, the Office of Exit notifies the Office of Export that the goods have left the EU. At the same time, the GMR is checked remotely by HMRC, and if the goods require inspection, then Gvms will return a held status. And this is then communicated to Joe, the driver. And if the goods do require an inspection, the driver needs to go to an appropriate inland border facility for checks to take place. So in this example, the goods aren't selected for a control. So at box 12, Joe drives to Claire's warehouse. So from box 13 onwards, Claire's received the consignment and can now make any updates into Chief that are necessary. For example, if the time of import changes compared to what she'd previously submitted as part of the pre-lodged declaration. She also needs to ensure that she is VAT registered and she can use postponed VAT accounting to account for import VAT, and that's paid quarterly. And she also has registered for a duty deferment account, which means that if she imports goods regularly, she can now make one payment a month through direct debit instead of paying for her individual consignments. So as I say, I hope that run through was helpful and sort of shows you how to use these case studies when you go away and study them sort of in your own time, and they often contain other links to further information. So the next case study, which I will not run through step by step, I'm sure you'll be relieved to know, is the same movement but in July 2022. So on the registrations page, we've just highlighted there that in this instance, so from July, the haulage company will also need to register for the S&S GB system. And then on the step-by-step, you can also see where the entry summary declaration is required. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Luke Myers, who works with me in BPDG, and he is just going to talk through another case study which shows some of those processes in more detail. Luke, you there and ready?
Yes, thank you, Tasha, and hello, everybody. If I could have the next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this too long, so for context, this case study was used as the basis for a event which I will put in the chat, which some of you may have been to. If you move goods via the short straits and you're a haulier or intermediary, which I know some of you are, this event should be very useful for you. So I'll just post that there. This case study is a little bit more focused on the GVMS process and the role of the haulier / intermediary in that and what the driver will experience. Again, there's a lot of words here. I appreciate it's quite difficult to follow, so I won't go through in sort of full detail right now. What I will say is that the sort of key things to note is the driver inspection service. So if you are a driver, I know our HMRC colleagues have already discussed this, but the driver will have a web portal, and more details are available on the event I've posted in the chat, where they will get their routing, so they will know where they need to go in the UK. I think the other thing to bring out from this slide as well is it goes into a little bit more detail on the precise sequencing of when the ferry operator manifest data gets released and so on. So if you're a haulier, a driver or an intermediary or a freight forwarder and you're interested in those processes, this slide might be more useful for you. And I know everybody will be getting a copy of this slide at the end in the after the presentation, so I would implore you to look at it there. And as I said, a much more detailed presentation is available on that link if you have time. Thank you, Tasha. Unless you'd like me to sort of bring out anything else, I think that's all I wanted to say on this slide. I think you're on mute. Sorry, Tasha.
Thanks, Luke, for pointing that out. I said, in the interest of time, I will move swiftly on to the next case study. Thank you very much. So the next one, which we have labelled as case study 3, is exporting auto parts GB from France. And in this example, we're not using the short straits from January 2022. And the goods are exported via unaccompanied Ro-Ro into a temporary storage regime. So these examples, so examples 3 and 4, are going through the process for if the port operates a temporary storage regime and you are exporting your goods unaccompanied. As HMRC said earlier, ports can choose whether they use the temporary storage regime or the pre-lodgement model. So just to be clear that this is the example for temporary storage. So the next slide, again, goes through the registrations, and then on the step-by-step, I will leave you to go through that in your own time, rather than going through the details today. And then just to say that case study 4 is the same example, but in July of 2022. So again, on the next slide, you can see that the haulage company has to register for SNSGB, and then on the step-by-step, we have pointed out the differences on there as well. So moving on to the next case study, which is exporting cheese from France to GB to a port that uses the pre-lodgement model. And this is just to show really what needs to be done for dairy products. So on the registration slide, again, you'll see it looks quite similar, but we have added in the requirement to register for IPAFs. And just to say as well that EU-based businesses can't register for IPAFs. So you'll need to be established in the UK or use a UK-based representative in order to register for IPAFs, as the IPAFs notification must be raised by a UK-based entity. So just wanted to bring that out on that slide. So on the step-by-step, we've highlighted here where there are SPS-specific requirements. So from January 2022, you need to pre-notify the import using IPAFs, and if checks are needed, then these will take place at the place of destination. So again, moving on to the next slide. So again, same case study, but in July. So if we move past the registrations and then onto the step-by-step. So the difference here is that the exporter will need to apply for an export health certificate, and this needs to be sent to the importer to upload onto IPAFs. And you will also need to enter via a border control post, a BCP. And again, there's further detail on that slide and different links to look for more information. So we'll leave that one there. And then if we move on to the final case study. So this one is an example of moving wine from France to GB via the short straits using transit. So we've aimed to show the different excise processes and the transit processes. So again, we have the registration slide, and the haulage firm will need to register for Gvms and also for NCTS in order to do the transit declarations. So on the step-by-step, we've put all the processes on there, including the different transit elements. So that includes the Office of Departure, the Office of Transit, and the Office of Destination functions, and also the requirement to have the paper transit accompanying document. So the TAD document needs to travel with the goods. And then again, if we move on to the next slide, we have the same case study, and then that shows it from July. So again, we've highlighted the different requirements in July on the next two slides for you. So I think that brings me to the end of the case studies. As I say, I appreciate that was a really quick run through, and there's quite a lot of detail in today's event that you will need to probably think about following the event, but I can see that we have had some questions through in the chat. So we'll now move on to the Q&A session. And as I say, we will make the slides available sort of as soon as possible following the event. And we will also share a link to the recording of the event as soon as that's ready. So I think I will start with some questions for my colleagues in HMRC, if that's okay. And there was a question that came in quite early on about the EIDR process. So the question was, does this mean that the importer must declare who will manage the supplementary declaration, and can it be the importer themselves or their customs agent? And then saying, if that's not done, I understand that the GMR will be rejected at the border or not issued. So I think my colleague Claire has already answered that in the chat, but I just wondered whether you could go through that in a bit more detail, please.
I'm not sure if Claire still has the. Sorry, is there an?
That's fine. Naheed, do you think you could go over the answer that she gave?
So yes, so from reading what I was looking at the chat, relevant to simplified customs declaration procedures. So yeah, from January 2022, for any trader importing goods, they'll be able to make full customs declaration using the simplified customs declaration process, as if they're authorised. And there are two options for the simplified customs declaration for the imports, and that's first entry into record, which is the EIDR, and the simplified declaration procedure, the STP. So for the EIDR, it does not require goods to be declared to customs using HMR systems, because information recorded in the importer's commercial records is there. But the SDP will require a simplified frontier declaration, but with a reduced sort of data to be given up front. So basically, both of those mean that there are fewer requirements at the border with additional information that you'll be making, but that needs to be submitted via supplementary declaration at a later date, but you need to be authorized to do that. So I think that's what I was getting from that chat question, and there is a link that we've posted which gives more detailed information, Natasha, so I'd revert to that link that we've posted.
Brilliant, thank you. And just to let participants know that we will be collating these answers into a Q&A document and circulating that to you as well. So you'll have a record of all the links that have been circulated as part of the Q&A chat today. And then I think there was a bit of a follow-up question on that, Naheed, which was, does it mean that we can use the customs agent's GB EURI number in GVMS instead of the importer's GB EURI? And I think the answer is that if you use simplified declarations, then you have to use the EURI that's linked to the authorization. Is that correct?
I think that is correct, Natasha, and certainly we can come back on that one, but that is my understanding as well. So I think the answer that we've got, we can say yes on that.
Great. And then not a question that has been asked explicitly today, but a question that we have had quite often at these events, so potentially worth bringing out, about whether an EU company can register for a GB EURI number.
I think that yes, we've answered this before, haven't we?
Yeah. So I think it was just to bring out and just to reiterate that you don't need to be GB established to get a GB EURI.
Yes. So for on the EURI, so the main points to remember on the EURI is that you'll need your EURI number if you are appointing someone to deal with customs for you. So I know we covered this before. We have and are established in the country you're importing to or exporting from, or you're making a customs declaration, or using systems such as Chief or the import control system. So yes, and you'll need a EURI number for that. I think I covered, I'm not sure how much more I covered last time on that, but I think, yeah, you're right. What we said before, it's still applicable.
Great. And then moving on to GVMS, we always have questions about GVMS in these events. So there was a question here about what document is required for GVMS. So they're saying in order to obtain the GMR, the driver will need to enter the UK MRN into GVMS. And what this person was saying was that their customers are only sending the C88, so they only have the ENO number. And the question was, is the ENO sufficient to obtain the GMR? So Nahid, I think there was an answer to this one in the chat, and I think the answer is that unfortunately it's not sufficient, but maybe you could talk through that a bit more.
Well, I won't talk about that specific part unless my colleague James Dibb wants to come in. Simply, I know that's not his area. He's simply on transit, but whether he can shed any light, I think that's one that I was looking at, and I think I'd want the more detail from policy on. But I will invite James in case he can add from the transit perspective on that. Is there anything you can add to that, James? Or
hi Nahid. Unfortunately not, actually. I'm kind of in the same position as you, not necessarily my area of expertise, but I definitely think the answer in the chat definitely stands by itself. So hopefully attendees have what they require.
Okay, thank you, James. Sorry about that. So Natasha, if we need to come back on that one, we will do, but I'm happy with what we've given in the chat.
Great, thank you. And again, we'll circulate the answers that have been given to all attendees. There was another question that has literally just come through now, saying both the seller and the buyer have to have an EORI number, or can we use one of them only? So Nahid, you might want to chat through this in a little bit more detail, but basically you need a GB EORI number to interact with UK systems and procedures, and you'll need the EU EORI number to interact with EU procedures and systems. Is that right?
Yes, because you are technically applying different EORIs for different legislations, aren't you? Whether it's under the EU legislation or the UK side. I don't think actually, Natasha, there's anything much more that I can add on that, unless there is a specific question that you need answering. But you are applying different EORIs under different member state authorizations, if you like. So I'm afraid I don't have much more to give you on that at this point, Natasha, but happy to come back with that if there's more specifics that you're seeking on.
Great, thank you. I did just want to move on before I hand over to our DEFRA colleagues. There was a question about temporary admission. So the example given was sort of a small robot that is being used in France and then being sent back to England for maintenance purposes. And just sort of, I think the person asking the question was a bit unclear on what needed to be done in this instance, and I think the answer here is to look up temporary admission procedure. Nahid, can you talk through that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, that's quite a big policy area, Natasha. The temporary admission basically we know allows goods to be brought in temporarily with a total partial relief from import duties, and there are different examples of where this procedure might be used in the case of goods imported for specific purposes, like exhibiting at fair trade or equipment for music performances and shows, etc. There are some specific rules where goods are placed under temporary admission procedures where they mustn't undergo any changes. So this robot cannot go under any change. Except where the normal changes are taking place, but not something you've done to the product. But there are rules on who can benefit from the temporary admission procedure in terms of the ability to demonstrate you're financially solvent or have a good compliance customs requirement history, and you have kept the appropriate records. So there are specifics around that. Now there are also rules about where you cannot go for a temporary admission, where if you're a freight forwarder or fast parcel operator or customs agent. Now there's a list of goods and the uses and the conditions around each of those, and we put that in the link. But basically, to be able to apply for a temporary admission, you need to have your EORI, your economic operator registration number, and you need to demonstrate where you are going to be keeping those goods, whether it's a robot or any type of equipment, and provide details on how those goods are coming in, imported, and how you intend to declare them to temporary dimission, because there's different ways of doing that and different authorizations in place. So it's quite a complex piece of policy, or if you're using simplified declarations as well. So there's a whole raft of things, but just to very briefly say that on the application process, there are different authorizations that range from full and declaration only, or retrospective authorization, or oral declaration where you can just move through the border, or do so by conduct, by just moving through the border, if you like. So the link that we've put in the chat basically sets out all the details that will answer the question that's been put forward on how that will operate, and to give you a good understanding on where you can and cannot use these special procedures, the temporary admission procedure in particular, on what is expected and the type of goods that are legible for those declarations, particularly the oral declarations. I think that sort of will covers that broadly on temporary admission, but like I said, it's quite a complex policy, not something that I could probably pin down in so succinctly as that.
Great, thank you. And as you say, we've got sort of further links in the Q&A chat, and there is more information available on gov.uk if anyone has sort of further information or would like further detail on that. So thank you very much for that. Before I move on to my SPS colleagues, just to say that there was also a question in the chat about Sevington and whether that would be open 24/7. And I can see that my colleague John has gone back on that and has confirmed that it is open. So just to say that there is, again, like a further link in the chat so that you can look up more information on that to whoever asked that question. So I will move on to my DEFRA colleagues. There were a couple of questions for you today. So there was one saying, which APHA category do nuts for human consumption come under, and will they have any plant health controls from January or July? So I think someone answered in the chat, but I don't know whether someone could also just answer that now, please.
No problem, Natasha. It's Jason from the plant health team in DEFRA. So yeah, in regards to nuts that are for human consumption, there are no phytosanitary requirements. So you won't need a phytosanitary certificate or to make a pre-notification for those goods for entry into GB. The one thing I would sort of caveat that around though is just to check whether there are any requirements related to sort of food standards and nuts for consumption. But just to confirm, there are no phytosanitary controls.
Great, thank you. And then there was a final question for today, I think, that I couldn't see had been answered yet, so it might be one that we have to take away. But the question was, are there any sanitary requirements, so certificates, for feed when it's raw materials for feed production? I don't know whether anyone that we have online would be able to answer that one.
Good morning. Yes, I've just picked that question up and put an answer in the chat. It depends on what the raw materials are. If they are products of animal origin, then they would be classed as animal byproducts, and they would need a health certificate to come into GB.
Great, thank you. So I'm just scrolling through, and I think that does cover most of the questions that we've had today. So as I say, for any further questions that we've not managed to get around to in today's session, we will share those with you in the next week or so. And please do sort of use the gov.uk guidance that's part of the slides. So if we move on to the next slide then, again, sort of further detail that you can go and look at in your own time. So we've got a link to the border operating model there. Also a link to the haulier handbook, which may be relevant for some people in the audience. And also we've put a link there to our other engagement events. So there are recordings of similar events to this one, and there's also a series of step-by-step webinars available now. So if you're looking to go into the basic step-by-step detail for specific products, then I'd recommend that you look at that list of events. So just before I wrap up, on the next slide, we have one final Slido question for you, and this is a bit of a feedback question really. So just asking whether today's webinar was useful. So if you could use the hashtag BPDG or use the QR code that's on the slide to access the poll, that would be great. And there's an opportunity there for further feedback. So please do let us know what you've found useful, what would be of value in the coming months, getting ready for 2022. That would be great. So then I think that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you. Goodbye.